idea, gentle action. And we use this word largely because it's a word coined by David Peat, who is one of the people who have been making the links between science and society, science and its links through human beings to social change. And that's the only reason. And he has a book that is called Gentle Action, and that book is available still in print. It's available through any Amazon or one of your bookstores, but I know Mike has also suggested in the invitation that the bookstore across the road might be interested in ordering copies for people. So that's why we use it. The key thing, however, is what is the value added? What do we get out of this idea of gentle action? What does it mean for us? How might it add value to the things we do already? And so I take as the point of departure here today stuff that has already been introduced to you, this understanding of the nature of reality as explained by these guys and many others now in this field, about what they call the implicate order, a very interesting concept, and an explicate order. So the explicate order is this material world of beings and things that we see around us, but underneath is this underlying creative potential that's at work. Evolutionary biologists refer to this, and one colleague who we have collaborated closely with and who is known to a few people here, Stuart Kaufman, has written on this subject as well, and Stu calls in his book Reinventing the Sacred, he talks about what Richard Dawkins called the greatest show on earth is the inherent natural creativity of the world around us. And that inherent potential that is underneath what happens, the physicist David Bohm refers to as the implicate order. And those things which then emerge out of that, he calls the explicate order, things which are temporary in nature, like us. They spring up, they change, they disappear. The implicate order, however, continues. It has infinite variety, potential, and it continues. So there's some very interesting thinking backed up by a lot of theoretical research and empirical research to support this kind of thinking. The Newtonian world, and many of us know about this mechanistic universe, the clockwork universe, or the mechanical view of the world, which has been 300 years with us, and most of us cannot get our minds out of that way of thinking because it has been so successful in doing so many things for us, including sending rockets to the moon. It's powerful, it's good. I am not at all arguing that anything is wrong with it, except that it is limited. And we need to understand its limitations, and there are alternative understandings of the world. And then there are a number of what I call points of departure, which are thoroughly grounded now in the science and in empirical research. The work on quantum physics and how the observer influences reality. And we all know this stuff, it's quite old now, that independent science, or objective science as we used to call it, and I'm one of those people who was trained as a scientist a long time ago. We used to believe that we were able to observe the universe in a very objective way, and that our beings never participated in that, and therefore our subjectivity did not influence our results. That has now been shown not to be so. Whenever we observe something, we change that something. And that process of observation, we need to recognize that changes the reality that we view. And it becomes very interesting. Now, people have been trying to bring it all together. And so we have some theories which are helpful and which we can look at later on, which we have spent a lot of time going through. And I've been working with complexity theory. Now it will be 22 years. And the word scares people away because it says it's complex. But when you get into complexity theory, it's very interesting and very helpful. The work of Ken Wilber on integral meta theory helps to bring a lot of what one might call these partial theories of views of the world. And how do we, with all of these points of departure, can we make sense as a community, a group of people? How do we bring it together? And we bring this together through the dialogue process, real dialogue, generative dialogue, not conversations of the usual kind or discussions in which we try to get people to arrive at a certain point that is predetermined. Generative dialogue will lead to somewhere that is not predetermined, and it's really open and free-flowing. And that's the way, to answer one of the questions that was posed, that's the way I think you can suspend judgment in a collective way to come to a collective kind of new position. So those points of departure, as I reflected on them, I looked for the link between these, if you like, theoretical points of departure, and I'm going to move to practical stuff in a minute, and I found myself that the real link for me between that science and the practice that I will talk to you about in 1 minute from now, or 2 minutes max, is in fact this whole community of science and non-duality. That's the link. That really links us as humans trying to understand our reality and the search for this transcendence. And what do we seek? And of course, one of the answers to that, of course, we all seek happiness. And then we realize one day that we are that happiness. And we are that transcendence. And that's what is underneath. And that's the implicate order, I think, that Bohm is talking about. And there's a whole community now, and if you Google science and non-duality, a whole range of physicists, biologists, others from the world of religion and mysticism are coming together in a huge community of people now with lots of material, conferences, videos, and so on that are exploring this. A great link. So I just thought I'd mention that. I know that this is getting very close to home in what people, in the belief systems of human beings. And I don't want to impose in that very sensitive place. Everybody has their own belief systems, but I explore you to look at this because I think it provides a nice link between all the theoretical principles I just referred to and the practice that I will now put on the table for our consideration. So what is gentle action? And I know you've gotten a photocopy from Mike. Everybody got that? Bruce, you didn't get it, eh?
I have an extra copy.
So he had sent out some photocopies of 3 pages from David Peate's book, Gentle Action. And so we come to the source. And David uses a great metaphor. This is what that he talks about, that section is called creative ripples. That I think really very well explains what do we really mean by this idea of gentle action. And then we'll see what we can do with it. So he talks about wavelets in a pond from a stone. So you throw a stone into a pond, which is an external impact on the system, and the waves start to come from all directions. These waves can cancel each other out. They're kind of chaotic. So they interact and they dissipate the energy of the system. Then he hypothetically says, what if little wavelets at the pond all interacted in a way in which was coherent and which started to build on each other? That will create a really massive wave that he calls a soliton wave. And that would really create change that comes from within the system rather than an impulse or an impact from outside, which would probably appear to be creating immediate change that is visible, but is likely to be unsustained and will dissipate itself over time. And so he thinks about how can we work from within the system? How can we identify, using this metaphor, these wavelengths in systems of conflict, in systems of inequality, and in fact, in all the social challenges that we face. Can we, in fact, use this metaphor to begin to draw insights into how we might do things differently? And that is what this is all about, and you have that photocopied pages that explains this quite well. He gives some rather interesting examples as well when he talks about superconductors. You know, superconductors are metals when cooled to a certain extent. As you know, all of us know that an electric current is the passage of electrons through a conductor when you have a difference in potential, electrical potential, one end to the other end. That's what a battery does, or a transformer. Creates a difference in potential, the current flows, and if you put a light bulb which has a wire that has resistance, when the electrons go through that wire, it fights against the resistance and generates heat. It generates heat, it generates light, but it burns out quite quickly. In a superconductor, the electrons, because of the system that the temperature at which you cool the electrons begin to pair with each other. And they begin a gentle dance and will move. And they don't need a high potential anymore to make them move. They continue to move with a little stimulation. And he uses that as an example of where the energy of the system itself begins to make change and to move. So a bunch of examples from David Peate's book. Let me move now. What have we done so far? We have talked about the theoretical principles. And one of the things I'd like you to do when we have our little table discussions is to really begin to interrogate the practice through the lens of the principles to see whether we can get value added. I think that's what will really lead us to decide whether we continue with this work or not. So those of you who were here the last time would have heard, and Vern mentioned, this approach that I have worked with a number of people. We have developed this in Winnipeg at the International Institute for Sustainable Development, and was absorbed and used by international agencies, UNDP, and many others. See if this helps you to get the understanding. And I'll just go through quickly. I did it the last time, but we have a few people who are not here. We have a number of, and continue to have a lot of poverty action groups, people fighting poverty, whether in Canada, or Africa, or Asia, or wherever. And most of these programs that seek to reduce poverty are outsiders coming in with a lot of ideas and money and technology, and they say, I will give to you, and you will become like me. And we've tried it for a long time, and we know the results of that kind of approach. This approach says, let's start with what people have, including their energy. Let's see what their vision for a better life is, not our vision of a better life for them, but their own vision. So if we know their assets, and we know their vision, then we should talk about what they can do on their own to move from where they are to where they want to be. And only then do we negotiate what is it they need from the outside, whether it's from government or from an NGO or from some action group. We then get to define that help that people need from the outside. And so that help itself, whether it be technology, money, policy change, governance changes, they have to be done in a negotiated way, in a participatory manner that works with the system to get people, to help them to get to where they want to be. And that would be one way of how gentle action might work. Now, it's a very simple shift, and that shift is to begin to work with what people have rather than with what they need. And you're not neglecting the needs. But the first question that you pose to any system is such a critical question, even in conflict resolution,
because it might set the tone for the entire process that follows. And when you say, I have, you need, I will give to you, you set the tone for dependency. You are reinforcing a dependency syndrome. And so to try to get a self-empowerment process later on becomes very difficult. The other process that is well known, I have used this but did not develop this one, is called appreciative action.
Inquiry.
Sorry, appreciative inquiry, relate to action. But the process is appreciative inquiry. It's very well known, established in the literature. And the principles on which it works, I've outlined them very quickly for you. It's constructionist. It's to stimulate new beliefs, stories, and possibilities for action. So it grows from that kind of the same dialogue process we talked about. The point I was making earlier about as we inquire into human systems, we change them. The mere act of inquiry begins to change that system. So that you do not inquire and then act. The two always are happening together. It's about stories, it's about telling stories, it deals here with expectancy, so that now that Warren has defined it so clearly for us, I don't need to talk about that. And it's all based on positivity, which we believe helps to increase the openness to new ideas, to encourage cognitive flexibility, to get out of that rigidity, and so on. So how does it work? It starts with the discovery process, and you will recognize a number of parallels to this process and the process of the sustainable livelihoods approach. It's called the 4Ds approach: discovery, dream, design, and delivery. And this has worked a lot with the private sector, large corporations, management consultancy firms. This approach, well, I should have mentioned that the assets approach on which we built and worked in communities around the world was developed at Northwestern University. And I first heard it on the CBC Ideas program. The guys from Northwestern had come down at the invitation of CBC, and I was listening to Ideas, and this struck me that while they were using it in the inner city ghettos of the United States, this might be useful in the developing world in communities all across the world. This process was developed at Case University, again in the US, and being widely used. Discovery, you discuss the best of what is. The interviewer who is asking about what the best is then changes role, and the interviewee becomes the interviewer. And so you get a kind of a consolidated picture of the best of what is, whether that's in a corporation or a community or a conflict situation, wherever. The next step is the dream step. And here participants are asked to imagine their organization or community. What might it be if you play God? What if you're dreaming about the best possible situation of your community or your organization, what would that look like? So that's your dream phase. And the process leads to a common dream, so you don't have 1,000 dreams. The third step is the design. Now you begin to get into concrete proposals for change. You use generative approaches, but you encourage more possibility statements, provocative statements, not run-of-the-mill. You forget about the resource constraints. Because if you think constantly about the resource constraints, you come back with run-of-the-mill propositions, the stuff that everybody does every day, and you're not likely to get really big fundamental changes. You know, this has been applied into a bunch of corporations in which you have management consultants who come in and say, this is wrong, that is wrong, that is wrong, this is how you fix it. This approach says, what's working here, and what do people really dream about for this organization? It locates the energy for change, just like the previous approach. This is about tapping into the subtle energies for change, and that's the link to gentle action. And then, of course, you do the delivery process. But look at this delivery process. Typically, in the federal government of Canada, for example, where I worked for several years, or anywhere in a corporation, I sit on the board of private sector corporations, what we typically do is you set up a committee, or you have an action plan. Because if you don't have an action plan, what on earth are you doing? And you better have objectively verifiable indicators. Otherwise, the Director General at CEDA will not approve your project. I was one of those. This process says everybody is allowed to come up with their actions. So we have everybody generating actions, not a committee setting up to deliver and then to say, no, that I know that that doesn't work, so forget about that. And then, of course, what is the role of the boss, the leadership of the organization? It is to begin to support and nurture those that are likely to lead to the common dream. Hey, I mean, that sounds like gentle action to me. The key is you are tapping into the energies of the system rather than forcing the system to work against its inherent potential. And that is what these physicists and scientists are arguing about and saying. So, in a way, it's not telling you to do anything different. Maybe this comes naturally to many people, and this is what they do. Maybe not. But the value added in my mind is, I put this for your own thinking, is that we have all of these thinking and all of these theoretical principles which lead us here. We have this action which has been developed quite independently of all these theoretical propositions. Now that we have the two that can come together, can the theory interrogate the practice and the practice interrogate the theory so that together they might emerge and take us somewhere beyond the sustainable livelihoods approach, or in fact beyond the appreciative inquiry. Now there are a bunch of others which we won't have time to go into, but if there is enough interest and we want to continue this thinking, there's a lot of work still to be done. One of them, for example, and I'll just quickly mention this and then mention a few others that we will not go into, is a process I've been working with for a while now, and developed this approach with Joran Hayden, who I should acknowledge, who was a political scientist from Norway who worked for 25 or 30 years at the University of Dar es Salaam in Tanzania. And Joran has written books on the political scientist. And as I was grappling with governance for poverty at the UN, he and I met on a few occasions and we looked, and we realized that what we needed to do was to figure out how to make power a positive sum game. But let me go through, why is that important? So here we talk a lot about empowerment. Well, the first thing I need to tell you about empowerment is that I have, after writing a book on it, I have concluded that empowerment is a nonsense word, in the sense that in real situations where you have a power differential, people who have power never give power to those who do not have freely, willingly. That doesn't happen. So if you say to empower, you're probably talking about transfer of goods or transfer of technology. You're not talking about real power change, where the one who had more power than the other one are going to be equal. Don't work like that. We all know that those who do not have the power have to engage in taking that power. Now, you know what? For a long time in the history of human civilization, this was violent. That process of changing power relations was violent. But we have now a number of examples in which it's not that violent. So we have pulled together from all the processes we have observed to outline a very simple process of how you can begin to change power relations or self-empowerment. Step one is mobilization, which you know. People have to form groups for change. We all know that. Anybody who works in community change know that a single person crying out in the wilderness is not likely to have impact, but forming a group and beginning to articulate the issue. So the second step is articulation. So you form a group, you begin to articulate issues, people have a common position, and then the problem begins, right? Contestation. Now you have to engage in a way in which you will be getting change, in which your own concerns, deprivations, inequalities can be addressed with the people who have that power. This is a huge problem. As we said in the past, this was done violently, so whoever could win the battle became the victor. But now there are a number of ways of doing this differently. We have had charismatic leadership, people like Gandhi and Martin Luther King and Nelson Mandela have demonstrated that we can do these things differently. Each of these cases, it was not purely non-violent. There was still some violence. And I am still struggling with this contestation issue of how to make it more consistent with the principles of gentle action. How to get to the source of the energy within the system. And one of those things that need to change is the concept of power, i.e., how do we make power a positive sum game? Theoretically, that work has been done, and I've reviewed that work in a recent book that I wrote on the legal rights of the poor. So game theory explains a lot about how this can be done theoretically. In practice, we simply have to figure out, do you really have to be wrong for me to be right? Or can we find ways in which you can be right and I can be right? Can we not grow the power cake? Is the idea of the economy not a good example? Because if people have to share an economy and get more, it's always helpful when that economy grows, as we all know. Power, when you get into the heart of understanding the nature of power, which is typically a distributed system and not a single central system, there are a number of ways in which that power cake can grow and power differentials can begin to change. So the key idea has to be, we believe, is making power a positive sum game. And that will be a huge shift. And once that's done, so public spirited leadership and all of that will be helpful. I know Vern has thought a little bit about this as well. So that's one of the things I will ask Vern to share a little bit on as well. How might we make this contestation less violent, drawing more from the principles and this big idea of making power a positive sum game? And we have written papers, Yoran and I, on how this might happen. And he and I, in fact, were looking for some case studies. We have a few now that we can share down the road. Vern, this is your slide that you will make sometime in the future, but today you will just talk about it. So Vern will talk about how do we apply these principles to conflict resolution. He will draw from the work that he's